Okay, it's time to play some fighting games and answer some questions. I know I said I wasn't going to change the name of it not that long ago, but it's funny what having a period of like a month where you couldn't actually do anything will change your opinions on things. Anyway, so first question from the comments on the last video 1,000 years ago. I can't for the life of me keep 100% up to date with the kill feed. Most of the time I have a good idea of how many people are alive on each team, but sometimes I'll be lost as to what the heck is up, or what the heck is going on. How can I improve my kill feed awareness? I tried the metronome tip without much success. Should I develop the habit of constantly peeking the corner of the screen, or should I train myself to be triggered by the visual cues? So personally, I don't check the corner of the screen frequently. I'm just looking for like out of the corner of my eye for the kill feed to show up. Something that might help with that is like tinkering with the colorblind settings, because you can, if you change the color of your team and their team, it does actually change the color of them in the kill feed as well. So you might be able to find a color that's more like visually striking for you, and it can help you like pick it out. Otherwise, like, if you can't do the visual, like if you can't like just peek it out of the corner of your eye popping up, I mean, you're pretty much just gonna have to train yourself to constantly peek the corner of the screen now and then. That's kind of the only other option you really get at that point. You're either gonna see it out of the corner of your eye, or you're just gonna check frequently for it being there. Those are kind of your only options, but I'd recommend tinkering with the visual settings. You might be able to find a more easy color for you to see out of the corner of your eye. You know, like hot pink will probably do it, you know. Something like that. Yeah, that's kind of all I got for you. Not a lot you can really do about that one. You're pretty much gonna have to train yourself to do something, you know. So, next up, and this one was actually emailed, which was really surprising, but what do you think of the labeling flex support and main support? It feels like those labels are totally meaningless in 2020, and any player or any hero can be flex support whenever it's convenient for the Overwatch League cast. What defines a main support? Is it average healing per match? Is it not, or is it just not having a CC? So my understanding, I mean, I don't follow the Overwatch League, so you know, my apologies if I get this totally wrong. But my understanding of like flex support or like flex tank flex DPS as far as the Overwatch League is concerned is they're not talking about the hero themselves, they're talking more about the player, where the player is the flex support, meaning they can change between a bunch of different supports. That's what I thought it meant as far as the Overwatch League was concerned anyway, rather than being about the hero choice themselves. But I don't follow the Overwatch League, I just thought that's how it went over there. So, as far as what defines a main support, it's pretty much healing output is the main thing that does it. That's usually what we're talking about. Some of the off supports can output decent healing, like Lucio. It's not really unusual for Lucio to put out, like, pretty decent healing. But when it's pretty much boiled it down to, like, the main healers are, like, Ana, Moira, and depending on how good the player is, Baptiste. And it's pretty much the healing they output, though they do have some utility to them. But it's more about the healing output. The off supports are usually defined by being lower healing output, but they're better at helping you actually kill people. Like, Zenyatta outputs woefully low healing, but he has good utility in terms of actually helping kill the enemy team. Lucio, his healing isn't as good as Moira, but his speed boost is a tremendous amount of utility and helps kill people. Whereas the main healers, they don't really bring that kind of utility. Like, Ana can help you kill people, certainly, but that's not really, like, her defining feature. Moira as well, they just output a lot of healing, is the main distinction. It's definitely not having it's not about having CC, because Ana has CC, but she's a main healer, so if it was not having CC, Ana couldn't be a main healer, but she is a main healer. Yeah, like, it's basically healing output. Like, if you put them in if you put this hero on a team where they had no other support, which you can't do anymore, could this hero heal the entire team by themselves? If they could, then they're a main healer. If they couldn't, then they're an off healer, pretty much. It's, at the end of the day, it's all kind of arbitrary, because as far as, like, actually winning a game is concerned, usually the off support actually brings you more for this. Like, Lucio's speed boost remains just, like, one of the most powerful effects in the entire game. So he's arguably more important than the main healer is, especially with Sound Barrier being so good for countering certain things that you have no other recourse for, other than you either had a defensive ultimate or you didn't. He's usually more important than, like, the Moira is, to be honest. But, anyway. So that's what was my understanding of flex support as far as the Overwatch League concerned, and that's basically what makes you a main healer, just healing output mostly. So there you go. So now we go over to the Discord questions. The first one is, I see a lot of people unhappy about the amount of CC/booping that goes around, especially if you're tank, and I was wondering, do you think it would be fair if tanks as a whole had Reinhardt's passive steadfast? Since they're larger, they would be booped or stunned marginally less long/far. I'd pretty much be okay with this being just like a generic thing we applied to all of the tanks, really. Maybe not all of them. Like, I don't know that I would give this to Zarya, or, like, D.Va out of mech definitely shouldn't have this passive, you know? But I think I would be okay with just applying this to every tank, to be honest. Or at least every main tank, maybe not every off tank. I would also consider not giving it to Orisa, because Orisa already has Fortify, so she already has a way to mitigate crowd control effects like this. So I don't know that I would double down and give Orisa Steadfast as well. But I think, you know, this would be a pretty decent change to give to every tank, really. I don't really like sweeping changes like that, where it's like, oh yeah, we gotta put this on everyone when we put them in this role. But I think this one, like, you have a pretty good excuse to do it. All of the tanks. It's definitely understandable that everybody classified as a tank should be better at holding their ground than the rest of the cast are. And having Steadfast would tie into this. Maybe to varying degrees based on the tank, you know, like, maybe Reinhardt remains having the highest level of Steadfast, and then, like, Zarya, we give her, like, half the effect of Reinhardt's Steadfast, or something like that, since she's an off tank, you know. Maybe something like that, where it was, like, variable, but I think I'd be okay with giving everybody Steadfast. Or at least all the main tanks, if nothing else. Next up is, do you think Ashe needs a nerf? Dynamite's probably too strong. Outside of that, I don't think Ashe really needs a nerf. My thing with Ashe is that I'm okay with Ashe being strong, really, because she's hard to play. I think she's actually the hardest hit scan hero to play, personally, even more than Widowmaker. Just because, and this is going to be really subjective, I just think Ashe aims weird. There's just something about aiming with Ashe that is, like, weirder than all the other hit scan heroes. She feels floaty and imprecise in a way that the other hit scan heroes aren't. This will, of course, be an extremely personal preference kind of point, won't it? Because most people will definitely say, nah, you're crazy. Widow's definitely harder to play than Ashe. And I understand that. There's just something about Ashe that I find weird. Anyway, I'm not bothered about Ashe being strong because she's hard to play. So I think that I'm okay with a hero being strong as long as they're sufficiently hard to play. And I think Ashe is sufficiently hard to play, with maybe the exception of Dynamite. Dynamite is low-key one of the most overpowered abilities in the entire game. Like, the amount of ult charge it gives Ashe is pretty crazy by itself. Like, that in and of itself makes it really strong, because Bob's a pretty good ultimate, and she can charge it really fucking fast, basically totally off the back of Dynamite. And then the Dynamite, the fire debuff is just, like, really good, you know. I'm sorry, I never pointed out which team I am. It's the team with Android 21. No one else plays Android 21. Yeah, so, like, Dynamite's really fucking strong. Like, the debuff itself is really strong. Being on fire, you should treat that the same as if you got fucking bio-grenaded by Anna. Obviously, getting hit by bio-grenade is worse than being hit by the Dynamite, but you should think of it the same way, basically, where you're like, alright, I gotta stop fighting now, pretty much, because I've been hit by the Dynamite. So, like, I'd probably nerf Dynamite. I'd nerf the dot of it specifically. I'm okay with, like, the upfront damage on it being kind of high. The dot aspect of it, though, is just really fucking strong. So Dynamite's probably too strong, but outside of that, I don't think I would nerf Ash. I think I'm okay with her outside of that. Dynamite is just really fucking strong, though. Next up, how much do you think the meta of GM should influence the overall balance of the game? I think, and this is a somewhat contentious opinion, I think that the opinion of the GM players should be treated as less important than everybody else's opinion. Because it has never made sense to me to balance the game around the, like, less than 5% of the total player base's experience. Now, there's several arguments to be made for balancing your game based around the highest level players. The most common one you'll see pretty much is they're the ones that know how to play the game, so we should be paying attention to them as far as balancing the game is concerned. And I do understand that, but my problem with that is that the experience of the high-level players is dramatically different to all of the other players for the most part. Like, it's a well-known fact that if you are not in, like, Masters, team comp doesn't really matter. You know, it just kinda doesn't. Like, it does, but it doesn't really, right? Like, you don't really have to worry about, like, team comp to a fine point until you get to, like, Masters, pretty much. So, like, the argument of, like, they know how to play the game, sure. You know, that's true, obviously. The thing is that how much relevance does that have on the majority of the player base? Probably not that much. So I still don't think we should really be paying attention to them that closely. And then the other argument you make, and I also understand this one, is that if you don't balance around the high level of the high end of the player base, what you end up having is this effect where the game, as you climb in ranks, then the game progressively becomes narrower for you. Because if the game is not balanced around the high end, what happens is the meta at the higher end slowly becomes more and more set in stone, and your options as you get higher in rank slowly narrow, as opposed to, like, widening or anything. And I understand that argument as well. My problem there is, again, how many people are climbing to Masters in GM? An extremely small number of the player base, so again, I just kind of still don't care about that argument particularly. So, my stance on the matter is that we should not place the opinion of the high SR players above the majority of the community's opinion. I think it makes way more sense to listen to the vast majority than the small minority. Now, I don't think we should completely ignore the high end either. Ideally, we strike some kind of middle ground where we're balancing sensibly for both sides of this equation. But I think that in events where the high end opinion is different to the lower or the majority end opinion, the majority should take precedent over the high level players because there's way less of them than the majority of the player base. But at the same time, this opinion is almost entirely pointless because the lower SR players will almost always just parrot what the high SR players say, regardless of what they actually think. They will just ape what the high SR players say. So this distinction kind of doesn't matter anyway, because the low SR players will just say whatever the high SR players say. Usually, anyway. But that's my stance on it. We should balance around the majority, not the minority. So in events where opinion splits, we should favor the majority rather than the high SR. But this is usually the same thing. And then also, what do you think is more important? Making heroes balanced or retaining what makes them fun, unique, gives them identity? So I will also preempt a question that I know I'll get, which is, what do you think about the Bridget nerf? Because I like Bridget a lot. People always ask me when Bridget gets nerfed, what do you think about that Bridget nerf? And to sum it up, this has long become beyond the point of a joke now, and, like, just fucking rework Bridget if you hate her this much. Clearly, you don't, like, whatever you want Bridget to be, she doesn't fit that, because you're just ripping parts off of her constantly. So clearly you should just try again, shouldn't you? Because she's almost unrecognizable from when she was first entered into the game at this point. Like, she's almost a completely different hero now. Like, just try again. Just rework her into an off-tank or something. Just fucking figure it out. It's getting truly stupid at this point. Because every nerf is a little more egregious than the last one as well. Because it's like, alright, so they've nerfed Shield Bash's damage massively. They're probably good with Bridget now. Nope, they nerfed her shield down to 200 health. Alright, well, they're probably done nerfing Bridget now, right? Nope, they took 50 health away from her. Like, it's incredible. So the answer to that one is, I think that the Bridget nerf is ridiculous, and we should clearly just rework her at this point, shouldn't we, you fucking savages? Anyway, so, my opinion is that making heroes balanced is, of course, very important. If you cannot balance the hero without massively changing parts of them, or just ripping parts out of them repeatedly, you should just rework them. Because here's the thing, right? Especially with a hero shooter, but with video games in general, you're playing a video game because that video game fulfills a fantasy that you have, right? Like, every kind of video game fulfills a certain kind of fantasy. I play Dragon Ball Fighterz because it fulfills the fantasy of me being a highly skilled and powerful fighter, you know. People play games like StarCraft because it fulfills the fantasy of being this commander managing lots of different parts of the battlefield and wrangling all your troops together, responding to the enemy, you know. Games fulfill a fantasy that you have, and that's why you play the video game. And with a hero shooter in particular, right, every hero fulfills a fantasy within it, right? This is true for hero shooters and MOBAs. You are drawn to characters because they fulfill a fantasy that you have. This is why someone like Genji will always be more popular than Reinhardt, because Genji fulfills the fantasy of being a cyborg ninja, which a lot of people have a fantasy of. Fewer people have a fantasy of being a paladin. Personally, I like the paladin fantasy a lot, but a lot of people, you can't deny, people like robot ninjas more than they like paladins. So, every hero does this. If you can't balance a hero without adhering to this core fantasy that you have set up for the hero, you should try again. You should approach that fantasy from a different angle and just try again, right? Like, Bridget, we should just try again, clearly. It's ridiculous. And then someone like, I feel like Sombra at this point is probably worth a second pass on this, because to me, Sombra doesn't really fulfill the fantasy of stealthy hacker, to be honest, anymore. Because all of the changes that have been made to Sombra, in my opinion, have just pushed her more and more towards being soldier if he had more utility, which does not fulfill the stealthy hacker fantasy as far as I'm concerned. So I think we might want to try Sombra again at this point as well, to be honest, because I don't think she meets that fantasy anymore. Balance is more important. like, if there's a hero in the game that is just, like, massively disruptive, we should do something to try and fix that hero, like, here and now. And that might end up being, like, a pretty disastrous change for that hero. Like, if it was discovered that, for instance, Reinhardt just completely breaks the game because his shield's too strong, you know? Just an example. I don't think this is the case, but suppose his shield was so disruptive that he was completely warping the entire game. Then, and like, it was just like a non-debatable matter, Reinhardt's the best hero in the game by a wide margin. Then we should do something to fix that problem right now, as best as we can, which might end up being like a really horrible change for Reinhardt. Like, it might end up being like, alright, well, if we've got to fix it just like right now, we're gonna cut his shield in half, or something, you know? Like, it might be something real bad for that boy. But it's important that we get the balance sorted out kind of now, so that he isn't disrupting the game even more than he already is. So we do something right now to fix the problem, and then, as best we can, and then we approach it then we look for a more nuanced fix after that, where we're like, alright, so, we've sorted the Reinhardt issue out right now. What can we do to balance Reinhardt better? Because right now we crippled him so that he isn't completely breaking the game. We have to now split this difference, where we're adhering to this Paladin fantasy, but he isn't disrupting the entire game, you know? So I think balancing the hero should take precedent, and it might be terrible, but keeping the core fantasy of that hero, like, intact is also extremely important for video games in general, but particularly for a hero shooter or a MOBA, because that's the entire reason you play a hero, is you enjoy that character's fantasy. So that's what I think about that one. So next up is, what sort of maps, locations would you like to see Overwatch go to? What sort of mode would it be? Well, first off, as long as it's not 2CP, that'd be just spiffy. So I would like to see more interior maps for the most part. Now, the tricky thing with, like, an interior map is that it needs to remain open enough that heroes that can fly or have unique mobility options still have ways to use that utility, right? So that's the kind of tricky thing about interior maps, but I would like to see more interior maps. In particular, I would like to see, like, some kind of massive mansion kind of interior map, and this would probably have to be 2CP, to be honest. Basically, like, when I picture this in my head, I kind of just picture, like, the Resident Evil Raccoon Mansion as an Overwatch map. I think you could kind of do that without really changing the Resident Evil Mansion that much, to be honest. Where, like, the attacking team spawns outside, and then they're trying to take over the foyer first off, and then, you know, the Resident Evil Mansion, so you go in for the big doors, and then you can have some windows off on the side or some side doors, you know. And you try and capture the first point, the foyer inside, which is the giant staircase upstairs, is like the overlooking balcony that, like, wraps around the entire room. You got places you can go, because there's, like, the around the back of the staircase thing. There's even a basement door back there in the remake, so you could put, like, a fucking, some kind of, like, basement option in for a flank or something, you know. And then after that, you could do this as, like, a hybrid as well, where you capture that and then you escort something else through the rest of the mansion, or you just then go, like, 2CP, alright, now we're gonna capture, like, the fucking secret underground layer now, you know. I'd like to see something like that, just like a big sprawling mansion interior map. And this other one, I would like to see more, but I acknowledge that this map would be a fucking incomprehensible nightmare to balance. I would like it to be in a factory, specifically following an assembly line. And you could do this as payload or hybrid as well, because you could be following something down the assembly line. I think this would be a cool map to have, because it would be able to incorporate a lot of moving architecture in its design, right? Which they've kind of experimented with a little bit in, like, Busan, the mecha base, with those platforms that come up and down in the mecha base, or the walls, not the platforms. So I think a map that, like, features moving architecture prominently would be pretty cool. So I'd like to an assembly line, because you could be following it through the assembly line as far as payload or hybrid goes. And then you can have all kinds of shit going on, you know, you can have all kinds of, like, machines doing stuff around. They're moving platforms up and down, whole options are opening and closing. Maybe there's, like, a big machine that, like, opens up briefly so you can, like, go through the interior of it to go through a flank, but it, like, keeps opening and closing as, like, the presses come down or something. And then you've got just, like, a bunch of, like, shifting cover around the map, you know, with all the different machine parts whirring up and down. This would obviously be a fucking nightmare to balance, but I would like to see a map that prominently features, like, moving architecture like that, and interior maps in general, I think, are cool and should be, like, done. We should try and do some stuff with. In general, I just kind of want them to keep doing weird stuff also. And I mean, the problem with, like, weird stuff is that sometimes you're gonna accidentally make Paris or Horizon Lunar Colony, you know? This is just the inevitability. But if they're gonna do something weird, I want the weird thing to be the prominent feature of the map, right? Like, Horizon Lunar Colony, the most interesting part of that is the fact there's an area with 0G, which is not used at all. Like, how often are you fighting out there? Almost never. Like, if Horizon featured the 0G area more prominently, then I think it would be a pretty cool map, if still very hard to balance. So I just want them to do weird stuff, but I want them to, like, make the weird stuff they do, like, a prominent feature of the map. And, you know, sometimes they're gonna fuck it up. Such is life. As long as you learn from it and make a less shitty map next time, that's the important thing. So there you go. Interior stuff, more interior maps, and, like, weird stuff, moving architecture. Let's go. So, there you go. Next up is, could you give us a step-by-step guide on how to defend as Reaper? Is this the last one? No, it's not the last one. It's not the last one. There's one more. So, the step-by-step guide for this is going to be very few steps, to be honest with you, because the short answer is just flank less, play more frontline. Reaper has this advantage where he can be played just as a frontline hero, right? He can just, like, be with his frontline and, like, brawl it out with the enemy team. Like, you can just do this anyway, attacking or defending. But, like, if you're defending, there's always this risk when you're flanking from the defending position, where you're flanking the attacking team, right? And the attacking team might just move on before you're finished this flank, right? Like, you might be going in for your big flank, and then by the time you actually get in there, they've just pushed in and while you were flanking, and now your team's just been fighting 5v6 while you were going off on your flank because they just pushed in. So that's always a risk you have when you, like, flank on the defending team. Is the defending team, they're not moving anywhere. You can take as long to flank as you want, but if you're defending and flanking, your flank has to be pretty fast. You know, like, it has to be a pretty good, fast flank that you get into quickly. Someone like Tracer doesn't really get much option. Like, you don't frontline as Tracer, right? Like, so if you're defending as Tracer, you have to be in there flanking anyway. But it's a lot easier to flank quickly as Tracer for the most part. So, you know, that's always a risk you have. So with Reaper, you just flank less, basically. And you just kind of frontline with your team. Because here's the thing. Like, if you're trying to push in through, like, the Hanamura choke point, right? And the enemy, Reinhardt, is, like, sat next to a Reaper. And, like, if you're trying to push into, like, a Reinhardt Zarya Reaper sat at the door, dude, that's fucking hard. Reaper's right there, and he's gonna fucking chew me apart as soon as I take my shield down to do anything aggressive. It's really annoying to push into that, so you just kind of, like, hang out with your front line, really. And that's kind of the step-by-step, is you just do that. Now, you don't have to never flank, but your flank needs to be it needs to be two things. You need to be really confident this flank is going to pay off, because as the defender, going off the flank just carries a higher opportunity cost. So you need to be confident that this flank is going to have a good payoff. But more importantly, you need to be able to engage this flank quickly. Because if you don't engage this flank quickly, you risk the attacking team just pushing in. Now, with Reaper, this isn't that hard to do, really, because Shadow Step can get you into some very aggressive positions very quickly. And it will be easier if you have Death Blossom ready as well. So imagine you're a defending Volskaya, first checkpoint, and you're like, alright, I'm defending, we're having a great time, I want to flank. I'm going to Shadow Step into the window above us on the first checkpoint, and I'm just going to immediately drop down on them. Bam, flank has initiated basically immediately after I finished Shadow Stepping, right? I stepped back, I Shadow Stepped, I have already engaged the flank, because all I had to do was jump down on them immediately. This is why it's also easier if you have Death Blossom, right? Shadow Step up, jump down, Death Blossom. Because you got in, and you started the flank really fucking fast, and that's the important part. So that's what you want. That's like your main points for flanking and your defend. You want it to be really confident it's going to pay off, and you want to be able to do it fast, which is easy for Reaper because Shadow Step is a pretty good movement ability. Yeah, and that's kind of it. Step-by-step process is basically just flank less and hang out with your front line. Reaper can do that anyway, and it is just more encouraged when you're on the defending team. It's just really hard, and sometimes your team's gonna be really fucking annoying. Sometimes the enemy team is gonna be trying to push into Reinhardt, Zarya, Reaper, Mei, Bridget. That shit's so fucking hard to push into. It's so obnoxious, and just Reaper makes it so hard for the enemy front line to get stuff done, because he pressures for enemy frontliners, he pressures tanks, right? It's kind of his thing. So just hanging out next to your tank line makes it really hard to do stuff. So there you go. So next up, this is the last question for this week, is what's your favorite Dark Souls 3 boss? Mine is Midir. Now, Midir is undeniably a cool design. Midir is also the best dragon fight in the entire Dark Souls series, I would say. My problem with Midir is just that he's way too spongy. That fight drags on for so long because he just has so many hit points. That's kind of that's why I wouldn't give it to Midir. So, here's a very controversial opinion as far as the Dark Souls games go. I like the dudes in armor. I just like the dudes with armor. So my favorite boss is Slave Knight Gale. Which is just a dude in armor, right? But here's the thing. My favorite boss fights in the best boss fights in all video games are always against opponents that are more or less the same as you, but different, right? Excellent boss fight example is the Dante versus Virgil in Devil May Cry 3 or 5. Some of the best boss fights as far as video games go, right? Because you're basically fighting against another version of yourself, and it creates a very interesting back and forth between you and the boss. So I always like bosses like that. My favorite boss fight overall for the Dark Souls series is Artorias, and he's just a dude in armor. And the reason for that is again, he could be you in a different world, right? And Artorias, his backstory is just incredibly tragic. So the combination of, being a good boss fight with a lot of back and forth between you and the boss, he also is very strong thematically because I find his story very resonant. So he's my favorite in the whole series. Dark Souls 2, much maligned for a bunch of reasons, but one of the most frequently cited reasons is the bosses are, for the most part, dudes in armor. I like the dudes in armor. This is also why I like Sekiro. Sekiro's combat, at least, more than Dark Souls, because it feels like you're fighting the boss more. When you fight a boss with Sekiro, you're standing your ground and, like, having a back and forth with that boss. You're having a dialogue with the boss, if we want to put it in very artsy terminology, right? Whereas with Dark Souls, you're usually just scampering around the feet of the boss, phasing through its attacks by rolling through them, and then you just kind of, like, hack at its feet, but it, like, doesn't respond to you in any way. You're just kind of, like, hacking at its feetsies, rolling through it, right? You don't really fight it. Whereas with Sekiro, you do stand your ground and, like, fight the boss straight up. So that's why I like Sekiro's combat a lot. And if Elden Ring doesn't contain, like, at least some version of Sekiro's combat, with more options preferably, but if it doesn't involve that kind of combat, I'm gonna be really upset. So yeah. But I like the dudes in armor, dude. Like, I like them. I like them. And then Slave Knight Gale. Slave Knight Gale almost is better than Artorias for me, because the arena that you fight Gale in has such a huge impact on, like, the way that fight feels, right? Especially once you get to the phase with all the lightning and the sky darkens. It's an incredible spectacle of a fight, right? The problem is just that I don't like Gale as much as I like Artorias. So, Artorias still takes it from me. But Gale is undeniably a great spectacle of a fight. As far as boss fights go, like, for Souls fights anyway, it's pretty easy. I think I beat Gale on, like, my 4th attempt with it. Most of which was just getting used to, like, his weird cape attacks, which have a kind of odd timing to them. But, like, the arena that you fight Gale in is incredible, right? Like, when you, go in and the lady with the weird, like, egg lady thing happens, and then you go off, into this giant fucking just, like, desert expanse. You find Gale, he's just, like, a slathering monster to begin with. Then it goes into the second fight, and he, like, wakes up, basically. The thunder's going off, he's flipping around, there's fire and souls going everywhere. It's a tremendous spectacle. It's like, for the most part, it's kind of Artorias, but, like, with more shit going on, really. But Gale's story doesn't interest me as much as Artorias's does, so Artorias is still better, for me. But as far as the boss fights in 3 go, it's Slave Knight Gale. I think he's the best boss fight by far. Midir is definitely the best dragon in the Souls series, though. Actually, like, built up to, like, actually very well foreshadowed as a boss as well. And you kind of, like, hack it out with him, and you're like, he's not done. And you fight him later as, like, basically the super boss for the game. Like, I think Midir is pretty much the super boss for the game, really. But yeah, he's just too spongy for me, and he's not as interesting as Gale. But yeah, it's Slave Knight Gale. I like the dudes in armor, dude. Fucking love them. Anyway, so there you go. So that's it for this week. Thank you very much for watching. If you did, if you have a question you would like to be answered, post a comment, join the Discord, email me, you know, do whatever the fuck you want. As you can see, it doesn't have to be about Overwatch, it can be about whatever the fuck you want. What else? I started streaming on Twitch Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, 8 p.m. EST to 11 EST. The link to the channel in the description. And if you managed to make it away through the video and somehow still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content of middling quality in the future, and I hope you found the video helpful.